The cameras were flashing, reporters shouting, and my brother stood there grinning with that giant check, $100 million. Then the lottery official asked him, "Sir, can you explain why your brother bought this ticket?" The whole room went silent. That was the moment everything changed. My name is James Walker. I'm 62 years old, and I've lived most of my life fixing other people's cars in a small Ohio town. I never imagined my quiet life would turn into a headline about betrayal, greed, and justice. Yet there I was, standing in the back of a crowded press room, watching my younger brother, Rob, bask in the spotlight, with a smile wide enough to swallow the world. The flashes from the cameras blinded me as I stood there, unnoticed in my old work jacket. Reporters were yelling questions. How does it feel to be an instant millionaire? What's the first thing you'll buy? Rob laughed like he was born for that stage, waving that ridiculous cardboard check above his head. The logo of the state lottery gleamed behind him like a crown, but all I could see was the ticket in his hand. My ticket. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had told myself I wouldn't come. I thought I could live with the loss, with the humiliation, but something inside me needed to see it, to understand how far he'd fallen, or maybe how blind I'd been. Then, as the applause faded, the lottery official, a tall man with gray-rimmed glasses, and the calmness of someone who'd seen too much truth in his life, stepped up to the microphone. His tone was polite, almost routine at first. "Before we proceed with the full verification and payout," he said, "we have one small detail to clarify." I saw Rob shift uncomfortably. The grin twitched on his face, but he kept smiling. "Sure," he said. "Ask away." The official turned a paper in his hand, looked up, and said evenly, "Mr. Walker, can you explain why your brother bought this ticket?" That one question cracked the air open like thunder. The room went still. The laughter died instantly. A few camera shutters clicked in confusion. Rob blinked, tried to laugh again. "Excuse me," he said, pretending he hadn't heard it right. But he had, and everyone there knew it. The official didn't repeat himself. He just glanced toward the big screen behind them, a blank blue rectangle waiting to play a video file. I saw a flicker of panic flash through Rob's eyes. He glanced toward the audience, scanning the faces, and then he saw me. Our eyes met, for the first time since he stole from me. For a split second, his confident mask fell. He looked small, cornered, terrified. Then he turned away quickly, whispering something to his publicist. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, letting the silence choke the room. It was strange, standing there and realizing how years of loyalty could dissolve into a single moment of greed. Rob had been my brother, my blood. I'd trusted him with everything. And now, in front of cameras and strangers, truth was about to pull him apart, and I didn't even need to lift a finger. The official cleared his throat and reached for the remote control. "Let's review the purchase verification," he said calmly. The giant screen flickered to life. And that's where my story really begins. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before everything fell apart, my life was simple, quiet, predictable, and, in many ways, peaceful. I lived alone in the same house my parents left behind, a small one-story place with peeling white paint and a porch swing that creaked every time the wind moved through it. The house sat at the end of Maplewood Lane, where folks still waved at each other when they drove by. I didn't have much, but what I did have, I earned with honest work. For 40 years, I'd been a mechanic. My little garage sat just off the highway, a faded red building with a rusted sign that read, "Walker's Auto Repair." Most of my customers were old neighbors, farmers, or travelers whose cars broke down on the road. They called me Old Reliable James. I liked that. It wasn't fame or fortune, but it meant something. Every morning I'd wake at 6, make a pot of strong coffee, and read the newspaper while the radio played soft country tunes. On Sundays, I'd stop by the gas station on the corner, buy myself a breakfast sandwich, and pick up a single lottery ticket. Not because I expected to win, God knows I never believed in luck, but because it gave me a small thrill of possibility. I'd scratch it off at home, smile when I lost, and toss it in the trash with a laugh. That was my little routine. That was peace. Then my brother Rob showed up again. Rob had always been different from me. He was the golden boy, slick hair, silver tongue, and big dreams. Growing up, he used to say, "I'm not meant for small towns, Jimmy. I'm meant for skyscrapers." And he chased them. He moved to the city in his 20s, got into real estate, and cut ties with anything that didn't shine. When he called one evening out of nowhere, I was surprised. "Hey, big brother," he said, cheerful and loud like the old days. "I'm in town on business. Thought I'd swing by and see the old place." I didn't think much of it. I was actually happy. I hadn't seen him in years, and blood's blood, no matter what. So I cleaned the guest room, cooked his favorite stew, and waited like a fool, smiling at the thought of us catching up. When he arrived, he looked the same, but richer. Designer jacket, watch that could probably buy my house, and a new car so shiny it looked like it rolled straight out of a commercial. He hugged me and laughed. "Still the same old James, huh? Nothing ever changes here." I chuckled, though something about the way he said it stung. That night we sat on the porch watching fireflies. I told him about my garage, how business had slowed, but I managed. He sipped his drink and said, "You're too humble for your own good, Jimmy. You could have been rich if you'd listened to me years ago." I just smiled. "Not everyone measures life in dollars, Rob." He laughed, shook his head, and called me the sentimental one. It felt good having him around again, even with his arrogance. For a moment I thought maybe we could rebuild what we'd lost. Looking back now, I realize that was the calm before the storm, the fragile illusion of family, before betrayal crept in through the cracks. I had no idea that within weeks, the same brother sitting on my porch, sharing my food and stories, would rob me of the one thing I never thought I'd have, my faith in him. It started small, almost too small to notice. That's how betrayal always sneaks in, doesn't it? You mistake the first crack for a shadow until the whole wall collapses. A week after Rob arrived, he started treating my home like it was a hotel. His expensive luggage sat in the living room. His cologne lingered in the air, and his laughter, loud, showy, and hollow, filled every corner. He'd toss his car keys on the table, order takeout, and brag about his business ventures to anyone who would listen, even my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Carson. "Sold a property last month, made 6 figures in a week," he said one afternoon, leaning back in my kitchen chair like he owned the place. "You should have joined me when I told you, Jimmy. You'd be driving something better than that old pickup." I smiled politely. "That old pickup's paid off, Rob. It still runs just fine." He laughed, not the brotherly kind, but that smug, condescending sound I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. "Always satisfied with scraps," he muttered under his breath. It stung, but I brushed it off like I always did. Family's family, I told myself. A few days later, he started stopping by my garage. The first time, he claimed he just wanted to see how things were going. He walked around inspecting tools and workbenches, touching everything like a man browsing a store he didn't plan to buy from. "Still using these old machines?" he asked, running his hand over the grease-stained counter. "They get the job done," I said. He smirked. "Yeah, well, I guess that's your specialty, getting by." That comment lingered longer than I wanted to admit. One evening, after closing up, we stopped by the local diner. It was one of those cozy places where everyone knew my name, a quiet sanctuary after a long day. The waitress, Marla, smiled and said, "The usual, James?" Before I could answer, Rob jumped in. "Make that 2 and put it on his tab," he said, winking at her. She laughed, assuming it was a joke. But when the check came, he didn't reach for it. While I paid, he leaned back and said loud enough for the next table to hear, "You see, my brother's old-fashioned. Believes in hard work, saving pennies, and dreaming small. Guess someone has to keep traditions alive." People chuckled. My face burned. I wanted to say something sharp, but all I managed was a tired smile. "You done embarrassing me now?" I muttered as we left. He slapped my shoulder. "Oh, lighten up, it's just a joke." But it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a warning, a glimpse of the disrespect that was growing behind his friendly grin. That night, while we sat on the porch, I told him I didn't appreciate being mocked in front of people. He waved it off. "You're too sensitive, Jimmy. I was just having fun." I should have known then. The way he dismissed my feelings so easily, the way he looked at me like a man measuring his next move. It wasn't brotherly teasing. It was greed studying patience. A few nights later, as I scratched off a lottery ticket under the porch light, Rob leaned over and said with a smirk, "If you ever win something big, you better hide that thing from me." He laughed. I laughed too. But for the first time, it didn't feel like laughter. It felt like a line being drawn, one I couldn't yet see, but would soon regret crossing. The weeks that followed felt like a slow unraveling of everything I believed about family. At first, I kept trying to convince myself that Rob was just being Rob. Loud, restless, careless with his words. But little by little, the way he treated me began to chip away at something deeper. He'd wake up late, wander into my kitchen, and comment on the way I lived. "Still using that old toaster?" he'd say, smirking as he scrolled through his phone. "You know, James, a little modernization wouldn't kill you." I'd laugh weakly, pretending it didn't bother me. "Toaster still works fine," I'd reply. But every word carried a tone, one that made me feel small in my own home. When I wasn't looking, he started rearranging things. My father's old wrench, the one I kept as a reminder of who taught me to work with my hands, disappeared from its shelf. My mail was opened before I even saw it. He'd park his car right in front of the garage doors, blocking customers. I didn't even realize it was intentional at first. It wasn't just my space he invaded. It was my dignity. One morning I came into the garage and found him chatting with one of my regulars, an older farmer named Dale. Rob was leaning on the counter, bragging about helping his brother manage this old shop. Dale looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know whether to nod or leave. When Rob stepped outside to take a call, Dale leaned toward me and whispered, "James, you all right? He seems bossy." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just family visiting," I said, though deep down I felt something. Twist in my chest. It only got worse. Whenever someone mentioned money, Rob's tone would change. He'd joke about how small-town folks dream small, or how I'd never understand real success. At first, I'd roll my eyes and shrug it off. But his words started echoing in my head when I was alone. I'd look around my garage and wonder, had I really wasted my life being content with so little? He planted doubt like poison. One evening, I came home after a long day to find my lottery tickets spread out on the kitchen table. He was sitting there, flipping through them with a grin. "Still playing this silly game, huh?" he said. "How much have you wasted over the years, Jimmy?" I took the tickets gently from his hand. "It's just a bit of fun," I said, trying to stay calm. "Everyone needs a little hope once in a while." He leaned back, smirking. "Hope's for people who can't make their own luck." That one hurt. Not because of what he said, but because of the way he said it, like he'd already decided I was beneath him. That night, as I sat on the porch, the crickets loud and the air heavy, I realized something had shifted. Rob wasn't just visiting anymore. He was claiming space, my peace, like it belonged to him. And no matter how many jokes he made or apologies he threw in afterward, I felt myself shrinking a little each day, becoming invisible in the house I'd built. I didn't know it then, but that slow erosion of respect was his way of testing boundaries, softening me up before taking everything he truly wanted. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of day I usually spent changing oil, checking brakes, and drinking too much coffee between jobs. The garage smelled like rubber and engine grease, a scent that had been part of my life longer than most friendships. Rob strolled in late, wearing one of his tailored jackets and sunglasses, that didn't belong anywhere near a small-town auto shop. "Morning, big brother," he said, slapping my shoulder hard enough to make the wrench slip from my hand. "Still fixing other people's problems, huh? Some things never change." A few customers chuckled. He meant it as a joke, or maybe he didn't. Either way, it landed like a slap. He leaned against the counter, talking loud enough for everyone to hear. "You guys know my brother here once tried to teach me about saving money? Look who's still rich now." He laughed, tossing his keys into the air. "You really should have listened to me, Jimmy. All that hard work. And for what? A garage that smells like burnt oil?" The men nearby smiled awkwardly. They didn't know what to say. I just kept working, tightening a bolt so hard my knuckles turned white. I could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck. "Enough, Rob," I muttered quietly. He grinned wider. "Aw, come on, don't be so sensitive. I'm just joking around. You know how I am." I did know. That was the problem. Later that evening, we went to the diner, my usual spot. The place was full, the scent of coffee and bacon filling the air. Folks greeted me with nods and smiles. I'd spent years earning their respect. But Rob, he couldn't just sit quietly. As we ate, he started talking about money again, his houses, his cars, the people who worked under him. He kept turning to me between sentences. "You ever think about retiring, Jimmy? I mean, what's the point of all this labor when you could just invest smartly, like me?" Marla, the waitress, poured our coffee. She smiled politely and said, "James here doesn't need much. He's one of the good ones." Rob snorted. "Good doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart." The whole diner went quiet for a second. I looked down at my plate, my appetite gone. "That's enough, Rob," I said, my voice low. But he wasn't done. "Oh, relax, brother. Don't tell me you still dream of some miracle, like that lottery ticket you buy every Sunday?" People turned to look at me. A couple of regulars smiled sympathetically. I wanted to disappear. "That's just for fun," I said softly. He leaned closer, smirking. "Yeah, fun for people who don't realize the world owes them nothing." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it cut deep. Even Marla looked uncomfortable. I stood up, left a 20 on the table, and said, "You can finish without me." Walking out into the cool evening air, I felt small, smaller than I had in years. I could hear his voice echoing behind me, still joking, still loud. When I reached my truck, I gripped the steering wheel and let the silence swallow me. That was the night I realized something inside me had cracked. It wasn't anger yet, just the slow death of respect. And the worst part? He knew it. I saw it in his smile when he came home later, that smug, satisfied look of someone who had learned how to hurt without lifting a hand. After that night at the diner, things between Rob and me were never the same. Something had shifted, not just in the way he spoke to me, but in the way he looked at me. He wasn't visiting anymore. He was staying, like a man staking a quiet claim to something that wasn't his. He began using my garage as if it were a storage space for his fancy car and business boxes. He'd talk loudly on the phone, pacing between the workbenches while I fixed engines. Once I asked him politely, "Rob, could you take your calls outside? Customers come here to get work done, not hear about real estate deals." He gave me that slick grin of his. "Come on, Jimmy, don't be so uptight. You should be thanking me. I'm giving your little shop some class." That word, class, came out of his mouth like an insult. A few days later, I came home from work to find my kitchen a mess. Empty beer bottles, crumbs everywhere, and the faint smell of expensive cigars. Rob was on the couch, watching TV, shoes kicked up on my coffee table. "Rob," I said, trying to keep my tone calm, "this isn't a hotel. If you're staying here, you clean up after yourself." He didn't even glance away from the screen. "Relax, big brother. You're too serious. It's just a little mess." "It's not about the mess," I said. "It's about respect." He laughed. "Respect? Please? You think you can teach me about respect? You've been living like this your whole life. hiding behind your little morals. I'm the one who made something of himself. That was the moment I realized my brother didn't see me as family anymore. He saw me as a stepping stone, a reminder of everything he thought he'd outgrown. That night, I packed his things. It wasn't rage that drove me, it was exhaustion. I couldn't keep living with someone who took and took until there was nothing left to give. When he came home past midnight, I met him at the door with his suitcase. "You're leaving tomorrow," I said quietly. He blinked in disbelief. "What?" "You heard me. You've disrespected me, my home, and my peace. I can't do this anymore." His face hardened. "You're making a mistake, Jimmy. You think you can just throw me out?" I nodded. "Yes, I can." He chuckled bitterly. "You'll regret this. You always do." He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just grabbed his jacket and stormed out into the night. The slam of that door echoed like thunder. For a few days I felt relief. The house was quiet again. The air felt cleaner. I could hear myself think. I told myself it was over, that I could finally get back to living the life I'd built before he came. But peace never lasts long when greed is involved. 1 week later, I woke up early, ready for work, and noticed the drawer where I kept my lottery tickets was open. My hands went cold. I searched every pocket, every envelope. The new ticket I'd bought just 2 nights ago was gone. Before I could make sense of it, the TV flickered to life in the living room. The morning news anchor's voice rang out clear as a bell. "Breaking news. Local man wins $100 million on a state lottery ticket purchased right here in town." A photo appeared on screen, Rob smiling, holding up my ticket. I stood frozen, the coffee pot still dripping behind me, realizing that my own brother had finally crossed the line between envy and betrayal. And this time, there was no going back. When I saw Rob's face on the television that morning, something inside me broke. The news anchor's voice sounded far away, almost dreamlike. "Local businessman Robert Walker claims the $100 million jackpot." I stood there in my kitchen, the cup of coffee trembling in my hand, my eyes glued to the screen. There he was, beaming from ear to ear, holding the same orange and white lottery ticket I'd bought with my own hands. I remember whispering, "No, no, it can't be." But the camera zoomed in, and I could see the exact fold mark on the ticket, the one from where I'd kept it tucked inside my wallet. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. My brother hadn't just taken a piece of paper. He'd stolen my dream, my luck, my tiny piece of hope that I'd carried through years of hard work and disappointment. The days that followed blurred together. People in town started talking. They knew we were brothers, the Walker boys, and they couldn't understand why Rob hadn't mentioned me once in his interviews. Some asked if I was proud. Others whispered behind my back, wondering if I was jealous. I couldn't face any of them. I stopped showing up to the garage. The calls from customers went unanswered. My tools gathered dust, and my hands, once steady and strong, shook too much to hold a wrench. I barely ate. Some nights I'd just sit on the porch, staring at the empty driveway where Rob's car used to be, and listen to the silence that followed him like a curse. What hurt most wasn't the money. It was the betrayal. I kept thinking about every meal we'd shared, every laugh we'd had, every moment I'd believed there was still some goodness left in him. Now, all I could see was his smirk on TV, thanking his luck while holding my ticket. A reporter even showed up at my door one morning, a young woman with a microphone in her hand. "Mr. Walker, we've heard you and your brother used to be close. Any comment on his big win?" I wanted to slam the door, but instead I said quietly, "No comment." She tilted her head, searching my face for something. Bitterness, anger, maybe envy. But I had none left to give. When she left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the stack of unpaid bills. My reflection in the window looked old, not just in years, but in spirit. I whispered to myself, "You raised him better than that." That night I went to the garage for the first time in weeks. The smell of oil and steel filled the air. I turned on the single light hanging from the ceiling and just stood there. The place that once felt like my pride now looked empty, hollow, lifeless. In one corner, I found an old photo. Me and Rob as kids, covered in mud, holding a homemade go-kart we'd built from scrap metal. We were smiling. I stared at it for a long time, then slowly tore it in half. The sound of the paper ripping felt final. I burned that photo in a small metal pan behind the garage. The flame flickered high, orange against the night, and I whispered, "Money doesn't change people. It shows who they've always been." And as the ashes blew away into the dark, I knew. Whatever part of me still believed in family, in forgiveness, had turned to dust with it. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Rob's face became the symbol of sudden wealth in our small town. His story was everywhere. Newspapers, radio, television. "Local man wins 100 million," they said, calling him an inspiration. Every time I heard his name, it felt like salt on an open wound. I stayed away from people, from the diner, from the garage. I'd take long walks late at night when no one could see me. The air was cold, the streets empty, and my thoughts heavier than the silence around me. I told myself it was over, that there was no proof, no way to fight back. Rob had the ticket, the money, and the charm to make everyone believe his story. Then, one morning, something strange happened. I stopped at the gas station where I'd bought that winning ticket, the same place I'd gone every Sunday for years. The clerk, Mike, had known me since I was a teenager. He looked up as I walked in, surprise flickering across his face. "James, haven't seen you in a while. How are you holding up?" I shrugged, trying to move on. He hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. Then he leaned over the counter and lowered his voice. "You might want to sit down for this." My heart skipped. "What's wrong?" Mike rubbed the back of his neck. "So, a guy from the lottery office came by a few days ago, said they're reviewing the winning claim. Something about verifying footage from this location. He asked if you ever bought tickets here." I stared at him, my pulse quickening. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you buy one every week. Always Sunday morning, same routine. Then he asked if we had the security footage from that day. Lucky for you, I back up all the tapes on my own drive just in case some fool robs the place again." He crouched down, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small USB stick. "You might want to see this for yourself, James." My palms were sweating as I took it. "What's on it?" He gave a small, grim smile. "Proof that maybe you ain't crazy after all." I drove home shaking. The world outside my windshield blurred. I fumbled with the laptop on my kitchen table, plugged in the drive, and opened the file labeled Lottery March 17th. The footage played grainy but clear enough. There I was, standing at the counter, wallet in hand, chatting with Mike, scratching my beard as I picked my usual quick-pick numbers. I handed over the cash, took the ticket, and slid it carefully into my coat pocket before walking out. Then, a few minutes later, another familiar figure appeared on screen. Rob. He entered the station, pretending to browse the snack aisle. He waited until I was gone, glanced toward the counter, then slipped something from his pocket, my lottery ticket, and waved it in front of the cashier jokingly before leaving. My throat tightened. I leaned closer, watching the timestamp confirm what I already knew. He hadn't bought that ticket. He'd stolen it. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred with tears I didn't even feel falling. I whispered, "You actually did it, Rob. You really did it." But then another emotion pushed through the grief, calm, heavy, deliberate. It wasn't anger this time. It was purpose. I closed the laptop slowly, wiped my face, and looked around the quiet kitchen. For the first time since the betrayal, I wasn't helpless. I finally had something that could speak louder than my pain, the truth. And the truth was about to change everything. That night, I barely slept. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the paused image of Rob on the screen, his hand slipping the ticket from my coat pocket. The timestamp glared like a wound I couldn't close. I kept rewinding it, watching the betrayal again and again, not because I needed proof, but because I couldn't believe my own blood was capable of something so cold. At one point, I whispered to myself, "You raised him better than this." But the truth was, I hadn't raised him at all. I'd protected him, forgiven him, rescued him when life chewed him up, and now he'd taken everything, even the small joy of my Sunday routine. As the sun rose, a quiet realization began to settle in. Not rage, not sorrow, but clarity. For the first time, I saw Rob not as my brother, but as a man who'd spent his whole life taking because I'd never learned to stop giving. Every insult, every joke, every borrowed dollar that never came back. They were all little rehearsals for this final act of betrayal. But now, he wasn't just a brother who wronged me. He was a man who broke the law. I brewed a pot of coffee and watched the steam rise from the cup like smoke from a burned bridge. The bitterness of it grounded me. I didn't feel powerless anymore. I didn't need revenge or public sympathy. I just wanted justice, the kind that didn't come from anger, but from truth laid bare. So I drove to the lottery headquarters 2 towns over. It was a quiet building, modern and glass-walled, the kind of place you wouldn't think could hold so much human greed inside. At the reception desk, a young woman looked up and smiled politely. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I need to speak with someone about the $100 million lottery claim filed by Robert Walker." Her expression shifted. "Are you family?" "I'm his brother," I replied, "and I have proof he didn't buy that ticket." They took me into a small office where I met Mr. Hughes, the head verification officer, a man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to weigh every word you said. I handed him the USB drive and explained everything from start to finish. I told him where I bought the ticket, the date, the time, even how I'd folded it before placing it in my coat. He didn't interrupt once. When the footage ended, he sat back in silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Mr. Walker," he said finally, "this is substantial. I'll have our legal department review it immediately." I nodded, my voice steady. "I'm not here for the money, sir. I just want the truth to come out." He studied me for a long moment, then gave a small, respectful nod. That's a rare thing to hear these days. When I walked out of that building, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. The winter air bit at my cheeks, but it felt cleaner, sharper, like it was cutting through the fog I'd been living in. For the first time in months, I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and took a deep breath that actually felt like living. Rob had stolen my ticket, but not my peace. That I was taking back, one quiet truth at a time. After leaving the lottery headquarters, I drove home with the window slightly down, the cold wind brushing my face. I wasn't angry anymore, just calm, steady, deliberate. For the first time since Rob stole my ticket, I felt like I was finally steering my own life again. The pain was still there, but it no longer ruled me. It had sharpened into something useful. Focus. Over the next few days, I went about my business quietly. No one knew what had happened at the lottery office. I told no one, not even my closest neighbor, Mrs. Carson. I didn't need sympathy and I didn't want gossip. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, and truth didn't need an audience until it was ready. I started documenting everything. The day I bought the ticket, my conversation with Mike, the footage timestamps, even the clothes I wore that morning. I kept it all neatly in a folder labeled March 17th, Purchase Verification. It wasn't much, but it was solid. I made copies of the USB drive, one for myself and one for the lottery office. I'd learned enough about my brother to know he'd try to talk or bribe his way out of anything. I wasn't giving him that chance. Meanwhile, Rob was all over the news. He bought a mansion on the coast, threw parties, gave interviews. He loved the cameras. They were his new best friends. Every time I caught a glimpse of him on TV, it was the same image. Perfect suit, perfect smile, pretending to be the self-made man he always wanted to be. I could almost hear his voice through the screen. Some people wait their whole lives for luck. I make mine happen." He didn't know his luck was already running out. A week later, I got a call from Mr. Hughes at the lottery office. His tone was measured but firm. "Mr. Walker, our legal department reviewed the evidence you provided. We've also retrieved the official surveillance footage from the gas station, and it matches your claim. We'll be inviting both you and your brother to a press conference for final verification." I was silent for a moment. "Do I need a lawyer?" He paused. "Not necessarily. The facts will speak for themselves." "Good," I said softly, "because I'm done talking." When I hung up, I sat in my living room staring at the folder on my coffee table. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the room. I wasn't sure how I'd feel facing Rob again, whether the sight of him would reignite the old hurt or the quiet fury that had lived in my chest since that morning. But the truth was, I didn't hate him anymore. You can't hate a storm after you've already survived it. You just learn to respect its power and prepare for the next one. I ironed my old jacket that night, the same one I'd worn when I bought the ticket. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, just like the life I'd lived. I wanted to walk into that room as the man I'd always been, not the man Rob had tried to make me feel like. As I hung the jacket by the door, I caught my reflection in the glass. For the first time in months, I didn't see a broken man. I saw someone waiting for justice, patient, quiet, certain. And I knew, when the time came, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The truth was already loud enough. The morning of the press conference came cold and gray, the kind of morning that carries a stillness before a storm. I woke before sunrise, the quiet hum of the world outside matching the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. For months, I'd felt like a shadow in my own life, unseen, unheard, erased by the man who once called me brother. But as I buttoned my jacket and looked in the mirror, I realized something had changed. The fear was gone. I arrived early at the lottery headquarters. The building's glass walls reflected a cloudy sky, and a small crowd of reporters was already gathering outside. Cameras clicked, microphones buzzed, and somewhere in the distance I heard Rob's voice, loud, confident, rehearsed. "There he is," a young reporter said excitedly, "the man of the hour." Rob stepped out of a black limousine, flanked by two men in suits. He waved at the cameras, flashing that grin the world had fallen for. He looked polished, every inch the millionaire he pretended to be. When his eyes met mine across the courtyard, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. Brief, but real. He hadn't expected me to be there. He leaned over to whisper something to his assistant, then walked toward me with that same oily charm he used to get through life. "Jimmy," he said, forcing a laugh. "Didn't expect to see you here. What, come to congratulate me?" I met his gaze, steady and calm. "Something like that," he smirked. "Look, I know things got messy. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The media's here, and I can't have any drama." I said nothing, just watched him the way you watch a storm you've already boarded the windows for. When we entered the building, we were escorted into a waiting room. Mr. Hughes stood at the far end, clipboard in hand. "Gentlemen," he said, nodding to each of us, "thank you for being here. We'll begin shortly." Rob shook his hand eagerly. "Of course, I'm ready whenever you are." But there was a hint of strain in his voice, a crack in the confidence. He didn't know what was coming, but he could feel it. The air around him seemed to shift. The charm that once filled every room now hung heavy and hollow. Reporters filed into the press hall, flashes lighting up the air. Rob took his seat at the center table, grinning for the cameras. I sat a few chairs away, unnoticed, just like before. Mr. Hughes approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Today we'll be verifying the legitimacy of the recent $100 million lottery claim made by Mr. Robert Walker." Rob adjusted his tie and nodded to the cameras. "That's me." Mr. Hughes continued, his voice calm but commanding. "As part of our standard procedure, our team has conducted a thorough review of the transaction, including all surveillance footage and purchase records. Rob's smile faltered for the first time. The crowd sensed something. The energy shifted, a ripple of uncertainty cutting through the room. And as I sat there in the corner, watching his fingers tap nervously on the table, I realized the power had finally started to tilt. Not with shouting or revenge, but with silence, patience, and truth. For the first time, my brother looked small, and I didn't need to say a word to make him feel it. The press hall was packed, rows of cameras, flashing lights, and reporters leaning forward with hungry curiosity. Rob sat in the center, his hands clasped, a confident smile plastered across his face like it had been rehearsed. To his right, a large check with 100,000 printed in bold letters leaned against the table, shining under the spotlights. He kept glancing at it, like he already owned it, like the whole world was his audience. I sat quietly in the second row. No cameras turned toward me. I was just an aging mechanic in an old jacket, invisible among the suits and microphones. But I didn't mind. I wasn't there for attention. I was there for the truth. Mr. Hughes walked to the podium. His face was calm, professional, unreadable. He tapped the microphone once, and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for joining us today. As per procedure, the Lottery Commission has concluded its verification process. Before announcing the result, we'd like to review some important details." Rob leaned back, smiling at the cameras. "Go ahead," he said, his voice smooth. "I'm ready." Hughes glanced at him briefly, then continued. "Mr. Walker, you claim to have purchased the winning ticket on March 17th at Mike's Gas and Deli on Maplewood Lane. Is that correct?" "Absolutely," Rob replied without hesitation. "I always buy my tickets there." I could hear a faint tremor beneath his words, a small ripple of nerves he tried to hide. "Very well," said Hughes. "We reviewed the surveillance footage from that location. Would you like to confirm your statement again before we proceed?" Rob adjusted his tie. "Yes, I bought it myself." Hughes gave a small nod, then turned to the technician in the back. "Play the recording, please." The lights dimmed. A large screen flickered to life behind the podium. The footage began. The inside of the small gas station, time-stamped March 17th, 9:42 a.m. There I was, standing at the counter, handing over the cash, smiling as Mike printed the ticket. The camera caught everything clearly, me signing the slip, folding it, and slipping it into my jacket. A low murmur spread through the crowd. Rob's grin faltered. His eyes darted to the screen, then to Hughes. "What is this supposed to prove?" he said sharply. "Continue the footage," Hughes instructed. The video fast-forwarded. A few minutes later, Rob appeared on the screen, pretending to browse the shelves, glancing toward the door. Then, when I left, he approached the counter, said something to Mike, and reached into his pocket. The angle showed it clearly, my folded ticket in his hand. He smirked, then walked out. Gasps filled the room. Rob shot to his feet. This doesn't prove anything. Maybe he gave it to me. Maybe—" Hughes raised a hand. "Please sit down, Mr. Walker." Rob's voice cracked. "You can't do this. I'm the one who claimed it." The cameras clicked wildly, capturing every second. Reporters whispered furiously. Hughes turned to me. "Mr. James Walker," he said evenly, "is this you in the footage?" I nodded. "Yes, sir." "And did you give your brother permission to claim this ticket?" "No," I said quietly, my voice steady. "He stole it from me." A silence settled over the room, heavy, undeniable, final. I didn't look at Rob. I didn't need to. The truth had already stripped away everything he'd built, his lies, his pride, his mask. I sat there in peace while the cameras turned toward me for the first time. After all the humiliation, the silence, and the loss, justice had finally spoken, not through anger, but through truth played on a screen for the world to see. The room was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector cooling down after the video ended. The air felt thick, charged, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Rob stood frozen beside the oversized check, his mouth slightly open, his face pale and slick with sweat. The confident millionaire who had strutted in moments ago now looked like a man cornered with nowhere to run. Mr. Hughes adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Based on the footage and supporting evidence, it is clear that the ticket was not purchased by Mr. Robert Walker, but by his brother, Mr. James Walker. The room erupted into noise, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. I stayed seated, still as stone. Rob stammered, "That's not true. He's lying. He gave me the ticket. We share everything." Hughes's expression didn't change. Our records also confirm that Mr. James Walker's signature was printed on the back of the ticket. That signature was erased before the claim was filed. Under state law, falsifying ownership of a lottery ticket constitutes fraud. Two uniformed officers stepped forward from the back of the room. The sight of them made the crowd gasp again. Rob spun toward me, panic taking over. "Jimmy, come on, say something. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." I looked up at him slowly. My hands were folded on my lap, my voice calm. "You said once that hope's for people who can't make their own luck. Well, looks like your luck just ran out." His face twisted, half anger, half desperation. "You'd really do this to your own brother?" I met his eyes, unflinching. "No, Rob, you did this to yourself." Mr. Hughes stepped aside as the officers approached. Rob tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. "Wait, you can't arrest me. You don't understand." One officer took him gently by the arm. "Sir, you have the right to remain silent." The click of handcuffs echoed through the room like punctuation at the end of a long, ugly sentence. Reporters swarmed forward shouting questions. "Mr. Walker, how long did you know? Were you planning to come forward? What will you do with the money now?" I rose slowly, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes on me. My knees ached, my heart thudded, but I stood tall. "I didn't come here for revenge or fame," I said. "I came here for the truth. I've spent my life fixing broken things, cars, engines, fences, whatever needed repair. Today, I just fixed one more thing." The cameras kept flashing, but I barely noticed. Rob was led past me, his head down, muttering something I couldn't hear. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel pity for him. I felt peace. Mr. Hughes extended his hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Walker. The winnings will be rightfully transferred to you after the formal process." I shook his hand, but there was no smile on my face. Money didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the truth had finally stood on its own 2 feet. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me, clean and sharp. The reporters followed, but their voices blurred into the background. I looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "Dad, I hope you're seeing this. Justice finally came home." And for the first time in years, I felt light, not because I had won, but because the weight I'd carried was finally gone. A week passed after the press conference, and the chaos slowly began to fade. The news outlets moved on to fresher scandals, the reporters stopped camping outside my home, and my phone finally went quiet. But silence has a strange way of forcing you to face what's left after the storm. The loneliness, the memories, the questions that don't go away even after justice does. I spent most days at the garage again, fixing cars and cleaning tools that hadn't been touched in months. The familiar rhythm of work helped me breathe again, but there were moments, in the stillness between turning a wrench or when the sun dipped below the trees, when I'd think about Rob. Not the man in handcuffs, not the fraud, but the brother I used to race bicycles with, the kid who stole apples from the neighbor's yard and always made me laugh. It hurt to know that person was long gone. One chilly afternoon, I was closing up the shop when I heard a car pull up. The engine idled for a moment, then went quiet. I turned and saw a young woman step out, Lena, Rob's daughter. She hadn't visited in years, not since her father started building his empire in the city. She looked different now, older, tired, her confidence dimmed by something she was carrying in her eyes. "Uncle James," she said softly, walking toward me. I wiped my hands on a rag, unsure how to react. "Lena, it's been a long time." She hesitated at the door. I I didn't know where else to go." "Come in," I said. "You don't need an invitation." Inside, I poured her a cup of coffee. She wrapped her hands around it, staring down into the steam. "Dad's in jail," she said finally, her voice breaking. "They sentenced him yesterday, 2 years for fraud and tampering with state documents." I nodded slowly. I heard. She looked up at me then, tears welling. "I'm so sorry for what he did. For everything. I didn't know the truth until after the press conference. I thought," her voice caught, "I thought you'd hate me too." I set my cup down and leaned forward. "Lena, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this was your fault." She shook her head. "He used to tell me stories about you. Said you were the reason he worked so hard, to prove he could be more than the small-town mechanic." That stung more than I expected. "I never wanted him to prove anything," I said quietly. "I just wanted him to be a good man." For a moment, we sat in silence. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph, an old picture of me and Rob as kids, covered in mud, holding a broken bicycle between us. "I found this in Dad's things," she said. "He kept it in his wallet all these years." I took the photo, my throat tightening. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled weakly. "I don't know if you can ever forgive him, but maybe one day you'll let me visit again. You're the only family I've got left." I nodded slowly. "You're welcome here any time." As she left, I stood by the doorway, the photo trembling in my hand. The past couldn't be fixed, but maybe, just maybe, something new could be built from what was left. For the first time in a long while, the word family didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a small light flickering in the dark, daring to stay alive. The days that followed Lena's visit passed quietly, almost peacefully. The world had moved on, and so had I. The story that once dominated every headline, Brother steals $100 million ticket, had faded into the background noise of 1,000 other scandals. For most people, it was yesterday's gossip. For me, it was a scar, healed, but always there when the light hit it right. Each morning, I found comfort in the familiar, the smell of oil and metal at the garage, the sound of the radio humming old country tunes, the ritual of wiping down tools that had seen decades of work. It was the same life I'd always lived, but it felt different now, quieter, clearer. I didn't buy lottery tickets anymore, not because I stopped believing in luck, but because I'd learned the kind of luck that matters can't be printed on paper. Mine had come in a different form, truth, peace, and a chance to breathe again without the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the world turned gold, I'd sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and think about everything that had happened, about Rob, about how close I came to giving up, and about how, in the end, it wasn't revenge that saved me. It was patience. One evening, as the light softened over the fields, I opened the small wooden box I kept on the porch table. Inside was that photograph Lena had given me, the one of me and Rob as boys, covered in mud, smiling with a broken bicycle between us. For a while I just stared at it. We'd been so young then, so full of promise. Neither of us could have imagined the roads life would take us down, one paved with greed and ambition, the other with quiet persistence. Somewhere along the way, my brother had mistaken wealth for worth, and I had mistaken silence for peace. But I understood something now. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's the sound of dignity surviving. I leaned back, the wind brushing against my face. Somewhere in the distance, kids were laughing, their voices carrying across the open air. It reminded me of Rob and me racing down the dirt road behind our childhood home. For a fleeting moment, I could almost hear his laugh again, the real one, before life hardened it. Maybe one day, when he's out of prison, I'll visit him. Not out of obligation, not because I owe him forgiveness, but because holding on to hate is just another kind of prison, and I've already served my time. As the sun sank behind the trees, I whispered to the empty air, "You won, Rob. You got what you wanted. But I got something you never understood. Peace." The porch light flickered on as the sky turned dark. I took a slow sip of coffee, let the warmth settle in my chest, and smiled to myself. I hadn't just survived the betrayal. I'd reclaimed the part of me that refused to be broken. The quiet man who worked with his hands, loved simply, and believed that truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home. Because in the end, I realized something simple yet powerful. You don't measure a man by what he earns, you measure him by what he can live without. And I had everything I needed.